From the flight deck of the astral plane, this is your captain, Starpilot33, checking in with flight log number 3. While a lot of flights on planet Earth aren't flying right now due to the current global situation, flights on the astral plane are not affected, of course. Thanks for coming along on this evening's journey with me. We have a long way to go, but I think you'll enjoy it. I'd wanted to do this next journey sooner, closer to the new year, but life being what it is didn't afford me the opportunity to have the right mindset despite the right setting, and I had to abort the mission twice in past weeks. I take this psychedelic stuff extremely seriously, just like one would if they were pre-flighting an airplane for a real flight or getting ready to launch a rocket into space. Everything has to be a go, or it doesn't happen. I've already prepared my dose a few weeks ago, prior to one of the attempts that didn't happen, and it was not just one mushroom, but a bunch of smaller ones. After doing this for several years now, I've come to the conclusion that every mushroom has its own personality, lessons, and mission. Whenever I've done one single mushroom, I tend to have a very homogeneous trip with a beginning, middle, and end that flows like a singular story. Whenever I've done multiple mushrooms, including the last time, when the trip had very distinct different phases, some were playful, some were thrilling, some filled with mind-expanding wonderment in the majesty of God and the universe, and some had some really dark, scary stuff too. After this last trip with all these elements, I think the different phases come from the lessons contained within the different mushrooms. Now, these are all the same species from the same grow, though they could be from different flushes of the same grow, and these were grown 8 years ago, so if you need any proof that properly dried and stored mushrooms do not lose potency, this is your proof. As I was grinding them up as small as possible, there was one that I almost didn't use. It was very small, dry, very black, not an abort, if you know what those are. Those are, just really tiny ones. This was just a small, dark, mean-looking little one, and I said to myself, if there's going to be a reason why I regret this, this is it. But I was laughing when I said that. I put it back for a minute, and I said, no, you know what, this was in the bunch that I picked, so I'm not going to exclude it just because of fear. Well, my digital scale only measures to the nearest whole gram, so the first time I weighed everything, it said 4 grams. The second time I weighed it, it said 5. And the third measurement after zeroing the scale also said 5, so I'm guessing it was just under 5 grams. Now, I say this every time, but normally I don't do this dosage, but for whatever reason, the last few times while picking out my mushrooms for the night, it's just come out a lot higher than normal, so I'm just trusting the teachers here, and that if they have lessons that require that kind of dose, okay, I'm game. So I took the mushrooms around 7 p.m. with orange juice, and within 15 minutes I felt it coming on very strongly already. By 30 minutes it was heavy to the point where I could barely stand up, and I knew this was going to be a hell of a night. I heard the mushroom voices laughing, saying, "Oh, what have you done? Now you've done it, you silly alien fool. You're in for it now." I just said, yeah, I know. The roller coaster's already left the station though, and there's no going back. I laid down on the couch under my blanket and was immediately pulled under into another world full of entities, spaceships, travel through other dimensions, and meeting some ghoulish creatures, but they were all very welcoming and telling me that I belonged there, and they were happy that I was there. Maybe this is more of the machine elves that other people talk about, because they were very gnome-like, very impish, elf-like, unlike the machine elves I normally talk about that are more mechanical, robotic, fractal beings. These are the first ones I've ever seen that actually kind of looked like gnomes. They were somewhat creepy looking with long, thin legs that kind of reminded me of something from like a Tim Burton movie, like The Nightmare Before Christmas or something like that. Then I popped back up in my reality for a moment, and I felt like I needed to do a self-check. Breathing is a weird thing. Sometimes you forget to breathe, and sometimes you have to consciously make yourself breathe. Sometimes my heart seems like it's beating really rapidly, and then other times I'm convinced I'm dead because I can't feel a heartbeat at all. At one point during the early experience, I actually thought I died. In fact, they were telling me I was dead and alive at the same time. They said somebody would find me at some point, but that I just ate so many mushrooms that it killed me, to which I said, that's not true. And they said, well, it is true on some level because you are both dead and alive right now. I said, okay, fine. I stood up, and I didn't see my body lying there on the couch, so I figured it was a metaphorical idea. My co-pilot cat was late for the flight, and when he finally arrived, he was crying at the sliding glass door. I let him in, and he knew right away what was going on, and he took his place on the couch behind my head when I laid down again. This was also one of the rare trips that I felt really nauseous. I like not sure whether to faint or puke. I closed my eyes again and was immediately strapped into another massive spaceship, or it was strapped into me. I'm not sure because at one point it came up behind me and fused with me so that it could see through my eyes, and away we went. And I practiced a few things like engaging that hyperdrive or whatever you want to call it from last time, but you do it within your mind, not through any controls on the ship. And I learned that once you get it fully engaged, you don't have to keep the thought process going. You can disconnect and it just stays put, almost like a cruise control, which was great to know since it takes a lot of mental energy to hold it in that hyperstate. At one point, I got to see a beautiful ship with dark, obsidian-like interlocking panels that were outlined with iridescent colors, ruby reds and sapphire blues and emerald greens, and they really did look like liquid gemstones of color tracing the panels. And the dark panels themselves were the same geometric interlocking circuitry of shapes that I had seen the last time during the engineering field trip where we studied them up close. This particular ship was on display, almost like a car show, and there was an alien entity there, and I said, no, come on, now you guys are just showing off, just seeing the beauty of this thing, and feeling like I was looking at what compared to like a supercar in our world. And they said that I could have one like that or be one like that or something to that effect after I was a little further along in my training. I got really humbled at the feeling that that ship was like truly the one to fly. Like, remember going to a skateboard shop when you were a kid and seeing that one skateboard that looked like it was something out of another dimension, and it was just so high performance and so expensive, and you just stared at it in awe and dreamed about what it would be like to have it? It was kind of like that, but it was a really beautiful, morphing, multicolored, faceted spaceship. At one point, I woke up again, and I think it was because the cat was meowing, and I looked at the clock, and it was 8:34. 1 hour had gone by after all that. My co-pilot cat wanted to go outside, so I decided to go with him this time. I was looking up at the stars in the moonlit night, and it was strange because my eyes could perceive so much more light now on the mushrooms. The usual stars were all visible, but I could see the fainter ones too, and the sky was not its usual dark blue to black, but it was actually a lighter blue, almost like before morning. And the fractalization of my vision seemed to divide the sky into a grid between the stars, outlined with light the way you see constellations depicted with a line connecting the stars to draw the pattern. It was like that, but it was segmented into zones between the stars in irregular patterns, almost like states or provinces on a map. I sat down because it was hard to stand and look up for that long, and my co-pilot cat was very happy and decided to give me big kisses on my face as he sat there with me. And it was absolutely clear in that moment that he knew what was going on and the state that I was in, and we had this fascinating communication. It wasn't with words or thoughts, it was just a mutual understanding of where we were right then. It was time to go back inside, so away I went, but he wanted to stay out on the patio. No amount of convincing seemed to work, and usually he follows me inside, but this time he didn't. So I left him out there for a while and decided to head to bed. Now it was around 9:30. It felt like I was outside for just a few minutes in the backyard, but clearly my perception of time was out of joint. I got ready for bed and tried one more time to let the cat in, and finally he agreed, though it seems like he wasn't really thrilled about coming inside this time. I went to the bedroom, and neither he nor the other cats followed, which was kind of odd. I laid down and felt that nausea hit me again, and I made myself laugh when I said out loud that I feel like I'm going to throw up something my grandmother ate. It was that kind of nausea. I drank more water and the feeling passed, but there was a lot of internal physical stuff going on with this trip. This was one of those times when I had a lot of tension in my joints and muscles, and the mushrooms were working through me in waves. And it's happened before, but it happened again last night where any movement resulted in popping and cracking of joints in my shoulders and back and neck. And whenever I walked, my ankles and knees were cracking and popping. And this morning I feel great, but exhausted, like I went to the chiropractor and had my entire body adjusted. I looked at the whole night like a healing session for the body, the mind, and the spirit. And sometimes healing feels like being sick before you feel better. Sometimes the mental healing and the adjustment comes after you feel like you're dead or insane. And sometimes the spiritual healing comes after the encounter with the darkness and the contrast with the light on the other side. This is the point where the trip got very dark, weird, and scary, and now I can see how people might experience something like this and really devolve into a bad trip, but I remembered what I learned on the last trip, where I got just a little taste of the darkness and how I got out of that, and this was much more involved. So now I understand I'm talking to an audience with many religious and spiritual beliefs, or no beliefs at all. That's fine. This next part was working within the construct of my own faith, but I think the message is applicable to anyone, since the concept of darkness and light, good and evil, is something universal. This isn't about who's right and who's wrong and what they believe. In fact, the more I learn, the more I realize that every viewpoint has some credence. Suddenly, I was wide awake and lucid. There were no visuals or sounds at all, but there was a weird gray lighting in the room, which was dark. There were two figures standing to the right of my bed, and they were large and black. And at the end of the bed, in the darkest space in the room, in the mirror, was the apparent boss of these two creatures. Now, you don't need introductions to know who's over there. This was clearly Satan, and he had two thugs with him. And they were entirely black in their entity, not visible, yet their presence was undeniably there. It started off with him saying some typical things to gauge my level of fear. He said he hated me, he said he was going to ruin my life, kill my parents. He said he wasn't leaving and that I was going to go crazy forever, blah, blah, blah. I just laughed at him. I called him a jerk and a bully and said I wasn't afraid of him or his goons, and that he couldn't do anything to me without God's permission. Without fear of him, he could do nothing to me except make threats and be an asshole. I told him he was an asshole, and he explained that that was his job, and that somebody had to do it and be the bad guy. And I said, well, I have a job that sometimes requires me to be the bad guy too, but it doesn't mean that I'm a jerk 24/7 inside. It's just enforcing rules. I told him being an asshole is not a job, it's a choice and a character flaw. This went on for some time. They were all very rude, like a bunch of schoolyard bullies, being humiliating and offensive, and I told him that he was going to hit the ground and kneel before Christ one day, and he didn't like that very much. I told him to leave, and he refused. Just then the cats started fighting in the other room, which they never do, clearly upset by the energy in the house. I broke up the cat fight, chastised the dark visitors for scaring my cats and being jerks. I let my co-pilot cat out since he was freaked out, and I told the visitors to leave now. I told them all to leave in the name of Jesus Christ and by the power of God, and he said, okay, I'm leaving, but he didn't. I told him he's a liar, and that's what he does best, and of course he isn't leaving, and he says, well, I'm going to leave anyway. I said, so do it. Somewhere in there, the two big bouncers left. And I let Satan know that his buddies just ducked out on him and left, and that he was a loser. I told him to leave and get lost, go F yourself, and every other combination of way to say it. And he said that he wasn't leaving, and I was stuck with him forever. And I said, I don't care. I'm not afraid of you. Go ahead, move in here, sleep next to me on the bed if you want. I don't care. And then I just told him to go. Go, by the name of Christ, go. He said, I'm not going unless you force me to leave. I said, okay, fine, I'll make you leave. So I told him that I loved him with the love of God, and that Jesus loves him, and that we all love him and can't wait to see him purified in the lake of fire, and that he should do the right thing and accept our love and just donate to the church of God. And he left immediately. It was clear when he was gone too. The energy in the entire house just changed, and now it was around 10:30. That was pretty disturbing in itself. But not long after that, the presence of God arrived and explained to me the difference between his power and the destructive power of darkness. He showed me an image of a supercell thunderstorm full of lightning and expanding clouds, but within all of this turmoil, there was this deep peace within the power. And then he showed me these billowing cloud towers of planetary nebulas exploding with jets of gas and starlight as stars were violently born, but within a cradle of peace in all creation. And then he contrasted that with the power of darkness and chaos and destruction, where there was no order to it, and no plan and no creation coming forth from the violence. He said to me not to disrespect the encounter that I just had, and not to blow it off or brag about it, because in the end, Satan still works for him. In other words, don't go sharing the actual recordings of this conversation. I recorded about 10 minutes of me talking to them with the cats fighting in the background and everything, and you'll just have to trust me on that one. No, I don't think it was a cool experience, and I really don't want to repeat it, but I'm glad I was able to once again reach deep down and stand on the truth of what I know in my head instead of cowering in fear like he really wanted me to do. Especially when he brought up stuff about the past and personal failures and struggles and tried to get me to believe that I was the things that I experienced instead of being a traveler experiencing things positive and negative in this learning experience we call life. We have to remember when we journey into the other realms with psychedelics, be it mushrooms, ayahuasca, DMT, LSD, etc., we are guests in that realm. and we're there to learn and be humble to whatever they have to show us. Respect is key, both in preparation for the journey and the setting for the journey, and your personal and mental conduct during the journey, and your responsibility for the information afterwards. Some of the things that you'll be told, they'll tell you not to share with everyone, just for a few people. Other times they'll tell you not to share what you've seen with anyone because it was just for you. It's in your best interest to listen to that when you're told that. I think Satan knew he wasn't going to get anywhere with me that night, so he was just being as obstinate as possible when he learned that I could be pretty stubborn too, but he already knew that because this isn't the first time he's tangled with me. The last time I saw him was in a dream a long time ago, and he was the exact same jerk. But I get what God means, though, about respect for the situation and respect for the lesson here. Don't blow this off lightly. Don't look at it as a highlight of the trip by any means. A lot of my trips have been sunshine, lollipops, rainbows, and spaceships, and after years of that, maybe they feel it's time to explore the balance. There can't be light without darkness. You can't see the stars in the daytime. If anything, dark visitors highlighted the contrast between their role and that of the light and the power of God, which is unmistakable by comparison. Then he told me that he, God, being neither male nor female, but having characteristics of both, gave birth to this creation like an artist creates a painting, but also like a woman gives birth to a child. Literally, the universe and whatever else is out there, and all creation seen and unseen, came from God out of him like a child. It makes sense if you think about the fractal nature of things. Cells on their smallest level divide out of themselves. Living creatures bring forth other living creatures out of themselves. Stars form from the gravitationally collapsing dust from dead stars, and from them we also come with the elements in our bodies. So it would follow that all of this also came forth out of something like a birth, not just a creation like a project. He said that when my grandmother was pregnant with my mother, sometime in the 1940s, the unborn baby that was my mother had inside her all of the eggs in her ovaries that she would have her whole life, meaning part of what would be me and my brother existed even decades before we were actually born in cells that would later become us. So how old are we really? We're as old as the universe, I think. He also said that no matter how far our learning, knowledge, and wisdom might go, that even the wisest ones realize that they are and always will be in kindergarten. There's no mastery, except in the eyes of others who judge them. He said, the secret of the wise is that they know nothing and are excited to learn. Remember how you were in kindergarten, he said? Everything was exciting and interesting, and the playground might as well have been the entire world to explore. Snail shells were fascinating, and the veins of dried leaves in autumn were more complicated upon closer inspection under a microscope. He said the world deadens that childlike joy of discovering and tells you that you've arrived and you know all there is to know in your studies and your profession, in your field of expertise and your knowledge of world issues or social talking points, but that's just running in circles. He said, remember, you're still in kindergarten, and that 6-year-old you is the real you, under all the layers of ash that the world has buried you under. Just like that last trip, one of the best, most powerful messages came after the darkness, after plowing through it. I can say with somewhat accuracy now that you are more likely to have a dark phase of a trip on a dose above 4 grams average, not accounting for people who are more sensitive to psilocybin. That might mean 3 grams or even 2 grams for you. I've been at this now for around 9 years, and I would guess maybe 20 trips or so. But with trips this profound, I really can't do more than a few of them a year and process everything that I really need to out of them. I think if I'd had this trip in the beginning and I didn't listen to the advice of those who'd gone before me and did a huge dose and had a trip like this one, I might have really had a scary experience. I've heard stories of people being dragged down a dark hole into hell for hours and hours and being tormented with the idea of their own insanity. I can see how that can happen. I think all my other trips have been building toward this one. This one really felt like another level of depth and not one that I would have wanted to be at even a year ago. So after that, I briefly saw my paternal grandparents. My grandpa, who died when I was only 9, and my grandmother, who lived to be 92 and died in 2000. I told them about my brother's kids who were named after them as if they didn't already know. And we had a few jokes back and forth about the funny things we used to say. Grandma was Polish, and she had a few choice names for us as kids that we still laugh about. The last time I looked at the clock, it was straight up midnight. My body was exhausted. There were a lot of alien light tubes and sounds and chattering noises and engines running when I closed my eyes, but the exhaustion was really setting in. I woke up one more time at 2 a.m. and the trip was done. I was amazed at how much water I drank during this trip. I had a 16-ounce bottle with me, but also a quart water bottle in the bedroom, which I drank throughout the night. Later on in the night, I must have sweated out that whole bottle because the sheets were soaked and I had my hair soaked to the point where I needed to get up and wash it immediately when I got up at noon today. So a trip like this is really a whole weekend for me. It's the preparation, in the day of, and it's also the entire day after, just processing everything. And not to mention the week of preparation actually before the trip too, just getting ready in my mind and my body for what I'm about to go through later on. So when I first woke up, I thought, wow, I don't think I'm going to be doing a dose like that again for a long time, or tripping again for a long time either. But as the day went on, my attitude changed, and I started realizing the difficulty of it made it satisfying in hindsight, and I'm actually looking forward to the next trip. It's definitely analogous to a roller coaster in that you stand in line and you climb aboard and you make that decision, and once that car leaves the station, there is no going back and no jumping off. It's going to be fun, up and down, terrifying, exhilarating, and if you're like me, you get back to the station with a windblown smile on your face and say, let's do it again, just like a child. Enjoy the flight. Life is a trip too, and no matter what challenges we face on the journey, we're in good hands and we're going to be okay. Keep your wings level and listen to your instruments or your guides along the way. So how does all this factor into the paradigm of personal healing? People ask me about how mushrooms heal you physically, mentally, and spiritually, and it's different for every person, of course, because we're all at different stages of damage and disrepair. What would have completely scared me silly 9 years ago is actually quite a positive experience today. I think my attitude toward fear has changed a lot. I used to be a very fearful person. I was afraid of things that could happen, things that were just a remote possibility. It was like living in a constant paranoia and anxiety over what ifs. Now the flip side isn't to be ignorant of things either, like refuse to prepare for a storm because it's just a hoax. That's denial, which is the opposite of fear in my opinion. Fear clearly is not a good thing in every spiritual tradition. Countering fear with truth and faith has been one major change over time that the mushrooms have worked in me. Physically, I can totally confirm that it does reset your brain, especially in regards to serotonin. And for those of us who are naturally low in serotonin, who are prone to depression, even when there's nothing external to be depressed about, there really is no better way to reboot your thought process and your brain. The day after all that last night, I feel like $1,000,000, and all that crap in my head is quiet now. But I know it isn't forever, and I know in a few months I'll need a booster shot, but over time I can tell you that even when I'm 3 months in since my last trip and the depression is starting to set in again, I can still remember the things I've learned over my mushroom trips in the past and hang on to those truths. I guess I'm at a point now where I'm really interested in hearing from other people who are more experienced than I am and have gone further. It's not often that I find people in general that I can talk with about this stuff at all. But that's another reason why I really enjoy getting your comments and emails, and I try my best to answer all of you when I can. If you want to write, my email is in the video description, starpilot33@protonmail.com, or just leave a comment and I will try to respond as soon as I can. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and share, and please take good care of yourselves, travel safely, and I'll see you next time on the other side.